Hi,
And to our
Carolyn.
guest, and to our guest, Mike Dano, welcome to the Georgetown Center for Business and Public Policy's latest installment of Little Nuggets of Tech and Telecom. Jen, it's been a
Welcome.
year. I finally got it all out.
You you did it perfectly. And I have to brag about our speaker. I'm so excited. Mike, it's I think I put this in our introduction, but if those on this webcast don't follow him on Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever, read his light reading piece. It's a must. And I always thought he could be an analyst. So once I left, I was thinking I'm glad had never decided that because he would have been tough competition for me.
Mike, thank you very, very much for making the time. I think you're actually on travel. Where exactly are you joining us from?
Yeah, this week I'm here in New Mexico visiting some family, but yeah, we've kind of been all over this summer, and I also wanted to say thank you so much for the kind words. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you guys today and all the kind things you have to say. So thanks so much for the offer.
I do think you said you were on your iPhone, so a shout out to, I'm guessing, rural wireless connectivity wherever you are.
I know. My fingers are crossed that everything
Yes.
stays up and running. I have to say the network here where I am in New Mexico is shockingly good, but
Uh-huh.
you never know. Actually, we had the power went out here in town. I'm in Socorro, New Mexico, which is basically as far away from anything as you can possibly get. And the power went out, and the power was out across the whole town, and the only thing that was open was Sonic. And so the
Oh,
line for
wow.
Sonic was like out the street, down the street.
Oh, that's
So
fabulous.
it's a little unpredictable here, but so far so good.
All right, well then, in advance of, any glitches coming up, why don't we just dive into it? I think what we wanted to talk with you about, and Jen, chime in here, is I would say over the last couple of months, we've been really focused on policy implications of different things going on inside the Beltway, especially with regard to spectrum. And also the big topic this summer was IIJA and the and BEAD program. But what we'd like to do with you, actually, given your giant brain and the number of years you've been following the industry writ large, is really get into the nuts and bolts on the business side. So, for example, what do you think are the cool hot topics right now going on in the mobile industry?
Yeah, all kinds of stuff going on right now. I mean, obviously, 5G is a huge discussion point. There's a lot of money that's being spent on that, mainly to buy all the spectrum licenses in order to do the sort of the full Monty of 5G, as I like to call it, the low, mid, and high band spectrum. So that's a big focus for the industry. I think from my perspective. So like you said, I have been covering the telecom industry for more than 2 decades now as a journalist, and I write. Right now I'm working for a website called lightreading.com, and so I write all my stories onto that website. And I'm kind of always looking for interesting stories that are going on, big topics to cover. And from my perspective, I'm very interested in two things going on right now. The first, of course, is Dish Network, and I'm sure you guys are well aware of the fact that they're trying to become the fourth big nationwide wireless provider, and are seem to be making progress in that area. But the odds are really against them for sure. I'm not sure that there's a market for a fourth 5G network in the U.S., but we'll find out. And whether they're going to be successful or not, I don't know. But boy, is it an interesting story. I just the this underdog company that's coming and challenging Verizon and T-Mobile and AT&T. Great story. Just
I
very
love the
entertaining.
fact that you refer to Charlie Ergen as the underdog.
Yeah, it's hard to say that about a billionaire. But
But
I mean, really going against a company like Verizon, they're pretty clearly an underdog.
so, for those tuning in who really don't have as much background on Dish, talk to us a little bit about what makes their positioning in the 5G market, in the mobile broadband market, so interesting. Do you think, aside
Yeah.
from the underdog aspect to it?
Sure. I mean, they, to their credit, Dish has been buying spectrum for more than a decade now, and everybody's been wondering, why are they buying all this spectrum for cellular spectrum? What are they going to do with it? And in 2019, they decided what they're going to do with it. They're going to build a 5G network. They signed a deal with T-Mobile and the U.S. Department of Justice, and that agreement spells out some pretty serious coverage requirements for Dish. And so, over the next couple of years, they're required to build a pretty extensive 5G network all over the country. And they reached their first build out target. It was 20% of the U.S. population by June, and they reached that. And so they have another one next year, and another one next, and the year after that, the year after that. So they're working away. They've got more than 1,000 people working all over the country to build this network. It's live. It kind of works maybe sometimes in some places. The results are mixed for sure, but when you talk to the people who work there, they're serious about it. This is a real thing that they're doing.
And Mike, you were just out there. I loved the countdown clock you showed in your article. But did you have access to Ergen directly? And then how does he think of DC and how DC thinks of him? Maybe Carolyn, a question you could opine on.
Yeah. So I'll start. I did get to visit their wireless headquarters. I did not get any time with Charlie Ergen himself, though I have interviewed him in the past. And he's really the architect here, but I think that he's really turned over everything to his wireless team. And there's a bunch of really smart people that are working over there. And so he seems to have somewhat taken a step back, and he has been doing some interesting work in DC on spectrum policy. I don't know, Carolyn, if you want to talk about that a little bit, but yeah, he's still in the game, but I don't think he's in a sort of day-to-day operational role.
I always find opining on Charlie to be a little bit of a slippery slope. Just when you think you know what he's up to, he goes in the other direction. I do think there might be a little bit of a question as to whether or not he's going to continue to meet his benchmarks. I know he did meet the first one, but I think there might have been some skeptics inside the Beltway who thought lighting up, Vegas with just a handful of folks who can afford the very specialized handset might not necessarily be the winning path to putting up a nationwide network. But again, people who tend to bet against Charlie tend to lose. So I will absolutely admit that I am one of the ones in the dark as to what he's up to. And whether or not the FCC is going to hold his feet to the fire. To your point, though, at the top of the call, there is a lot of focus. There has been a lot of focus, but I think even more so and will increase in where the next tranche of spectrum is going to come from. And from what I mean there is from the commercial operator's perspective. So not necessarily thinking about this from DoD and all the other folks who want more spectrum. And so because of that and the fact that there is no easy place to say, wow, there's 100 megahertz, we can go ahead and allocate for 5G and 6G, et cetera, I think there will be a lot of political pressure for the FCC to really look around and make sure that folks who have licenses are, being held to their commitments, and folks who either, didn't adhere to the obligations or who are missing their deadlines, I don't know that they'll get as generous a free pass as maybe some folks have in the past. So, Mike, I don't know if you would agree with that, but that's just generally the sense I have these days.
Yeah, for sure. I agree about, wondering what Ergen is up to ultimately. I think he's a very interesting character. I will say I have been following the debate around 12 gigahertz with much interest, and I'm sure you guys have been also. And even in just the last few weeks, I think it was probably last week that Charlie Ergen himself met with some of the top officials at the FCC because he wants to get that 12 gigahertz, the spectrum that Dish does have, that it's using for its satellite business. He wants to get that spectrum approved by the FCC for 5G uses as well. And so he's kind of that's his latest effort in Washington D.C. has been really pushing on that for the last year or so, and even there, there's a really interesting battle among, I've called it the battle among the billionaires, because so on one hand, there's Charlie Ergen. He wants 5G to work in 12 gigahertz. On the other hand is Elon Musk, the world's richest man, and he does not want 5G and 12 gigahertz because his company Starlink is using the 12 gigahertz band for its low Earth orbit constellation of satellites. And then on the other hand here's Michael Dell, and one of the investments that the Dell billionaire has is in a company called RS Access, and they have some 12 gigahertz spectrum, and he does want 5G and 12 gigahertz. Michael Dell does. So here's these, 3 billionaires all sort of fighting over, detailed spectrum policy and whether you can get 5G into 12 gigahertz or not. It's another interesting, area that's playing out right now. We don't know how the FCC is going to rule on that. They're looking at it right now. I mean, we'll find out.
So if you were a betting gentleman, do they? I don't know. Do they have casinos in New Mexico? I'm not sure. You were a betting gentleman.
We do actually. There's one up in Albuquerque. We drove past the casino. Yeah. I didn't place any bets there.
Who do you think wins? Do you think Charlie gets what some would call his windfall, or do you think he loses out to these other two? And I noticed you did not mention the incumbents. Where do you think they play into this discussion over what happens to 12 gig?
Yeah, for 12 gigahertz, boy, that is a tough call. I think there's a lot of, in 12 gigahertz specifically, I think that there's a lot of factors that are playing into that right now. A lot of political factors. I mean, on the one hand, the FCC really does want to be seen as releasing more spectrum for 5G. That's been a big focus of that agency for years now. And especially in the Biden administration, they have not made very much progress on that. They made a lot of progress under the Trump administration, but not much under Biden yet. And so I think they're under pressure to release some spectrum for 5G under some scenario. On the other hand, you don't want to go against Elon. I think that Starlink is definitely a sort of this American success story right now so far. And moving against Starlink, I think, is politically dangerous. And so really the FCC is in a tough spot. Plus, as we all know, they're not at full strength. There are 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans on that agency. Right. A tie vote. Biden can't get his nomination through the Senate. So it's I feel bad. I kind of feel bad for the poor folks at the FCC. They're really stuck on. I feel like they're kind of stuck on this one. And the bet that I would place is that nothing is going to happen until the November midterms. After the November midterms, we'll find out what political situation the Biden administration has. I would not be surprised at all if President Biden put forward a different nominee to the FCC. I would not be surprised that he gives up on net neutrality. I actually don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And then for 12 gigahertz, I would expect them to move pretty quickly on it. But boy,
that's a hard one.
I'm not sure. I mean, the odds may be a little bit in favor of 5G. But I would not be surprised if they decide not to, especially given all the trouble that they've experienced with the C-band and the interference that may be caused between 5G and airlines. The FCC certainly had received a black eye due to all that.
You raised the topic. Discussion. I was hoping we were done with that one.
Oh man, how can you not talk? 5G crashing airplanes is spent those. Yeah.
Mike, could I ask just a bigger picture question on Dish? Then I do want to get to T-Mobile. If you don't believe Dish is going to make deadlines, they own a lot of spectrum, but that spectrum's really only worth not what Ergen paid for it, but what someone else will pay for it. Yeah. And do you think that if we went down a dark rabbit hole that he's not going to make the spectrum deadlines, that someone like an AT&T, who obviously spent less than half of what Verizon did in the C-band spectrum, could buy them and then quote unquote solve their spectrum problem? I don't think that, my view is DC would ever let that happen because they were the linchpin to approving Sprint T-Mobile.
Right. Yeah. Dish is in an interesting position. I mean, so again, taking a step back and looking at Dish has a large amount of spectrum. It's not great spectrum. It's kind of funky, and you got to build some special devices to take advantage of all of it. Supposedly they are doing that now, and I think that actually raises the value of that spectrum, because they are getting companies like Qualcomm on board with supporting some of their bands. I think, if they win the 12 gigahertz debate, that certainly helps their spectrum positions. So ultimately, if you look at Dish, they've spent some money to build a 5G network, right? But they have all this spectrum. And if we learned anything from the C-band auction, $81 billion in winning bids, it's that, companies still do want spectrum. That spectrum is still valuable. And you're right, AT&T could make a move to buy Dish. I think that it's possible that Comcast or Charter would make a similar move. I would not be surprised to see that. Even a company like Verizon may see that as a way of leapfrogging T-Mobile. Whether that some sort of transaction with Dish would be approved by regulators, here's another battle. I mean, I didn't expect the Sprint and T-Mobile merger to face so much opposition, but it did. But they did eventually get that through. I think that there are so many options for Dish and Ergen that I would expect him to find, I expect him to extract value out of what he's doing somehow. I'm not sure that value will be extracted by actually selling 5G to enterprises, like what he wants to do. I think that's might be the toughest. Might be the hardest thing that he wants to do. But it's possible there too as well. So he's got a lot of options, and I don't know if there's other companies that have as many options as he does.
It's a good segue to T-Mo.
Yes, I was just going to say.
I know you said you also think this is a very interesting story and where they're headed.
Oh, yeah.
So tell us more, Mike.
Yes, T-Mobile. So the T-Mobile story. This is the story that I've been following. That I just think it's got so many ins and outs and all these weird things going on. And this is my kind of story, which is complex, arcane, spectrum policy, business stuff going on. It's just really interesting. So, as you guys know, that T-Mobile is building a big 5G network, and they've been very successful in that prospect. They've acquired Sprint, got a ton of spectrum, building that network. The latest testing results show that network is really doing well. It's super fast and covers a lot of people. And T-Mobile has been, they're reporting their quarter in a couple of weeks, and everybody expects them to do really well in the second quarter and throughout the rest of this year. So, props to T-Mobile and maintaining the momentum that their previous CEO, John Ledger, created. They're certainly continuing that. So, T-Mobile, very interesting story. From last to becoming a big challenge to AT&T. They were in fourth place before the Sprint merger, and now they're definitely not anymore. But here's, I think, what is a very interesting but is that T-Mobile, they're building a 5G network. The core of their 5G network is really those 2.5 gigahertz spectrum licenses. That is that's the fundamental building block of their current 5G network. And what is interesting is that they actually do not own very many of those spectrum licenses. Really old.
You're still with us. You're still with us. You're good.
Okay, good. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Because of really old rules, 2.5 gigahertz spectrum are not by T-Mobile. Their own educational institutions like high schools and universities and some churches actually own those licenses. And then the FCC recently changed its rule. T-Mobile could buy those licenses. So that sets up, so T-Mobile doesn't own those licenses. Now, here's the interesting thing is that there's a couple of other companies that have come up and they are trying to buy those licenses out from under T-Mobile. And the main one that's really driving all this stuff is a company called WCO, and it is fronted by a longtime telecom veteran named Gary Winnick. He was the founder of Global Crossing, which built a lot of some of the the very early undersea cables.
Where John Ledger actually worked.
Right. Oh my God, that's a blast from the past.
Recently spoke with, It's crazy. Like there's all these like weird intersections actually spoke with Gary Winnick recently. Talked to John Ledger. We're good friends. I hired him twice, and blah blah blah. Like, it's crazy. But at the same time, Gary Winnick is really financing this potentially very damaging strategy against T-Mobile, current T-Mobile, that involves basically buying its spectrum licenses out from under T-Mobile and essentially becoming T-Mobile's spectrum landlord, so that T-Mobile would have to rent its spectrum licenses from Gary Winnick's company. If WCO is successful in this effort, and really, so T-Mobile does not want to talk about this at all. It has made no public statements about this situation at all. But what it has done is it has bought a lot of those 2.5 gigahertz spectrum licenses, and it has also sued some of the spectrum license holders, which are schools. It actually sued a school district in Oklahoma to prevent that school district from releasing the terms of its spectrum leasing deal.
Really?
On 2.5 gigahertz licenses. Yes.
Did it win? Or is that still going through the court?
It's still going through the courts. It's still early days for this whole thing. And actually a lot of this is in motion, because there's 2,000 of these licenses out there. Right. T-Mobile has bought several hundred already. WCO is pursuing a number of the other ones that are sort of still up for grabs. And so, this is kind of a rapidly developing story.
This is good stuff.
Oh my gosh, it's such good stuff. Cannot get over it. I mean, once you get a giant telecommunications carrier suing a public school district over spectrum licenses, I mean, it's just bananas, like this stuff that's happening. And it's really, there's no way for T-Mobile to come out of this looking good.
Right.
And so Gary Winnick has kind of decided to get a little bit more public about what he wants to do. And here, okay, so here's the last thing I'll say about this story, which is just blowing my mind. So Gary Winnick has finally started discussing his ultimate plan. Now, and this is a guy who built some of the very first privately owned subsea cables in the world. His plan now, here in his sort of the final stages of his telecom career, is to create a new financial model that involves spectrum licenses. And so what he wants to do is buy spectrum licenses as his company, own them, and then lease them back to carriers. The purpose of which is to, first of all, is to give a big lump sum to those network operators. And the network operators can basically sell their spectrum licenses, get them off the balance sheet, and get a bunch of money back for it. And then Gary Winnick wants to use those spectrum licenses as an investment asset. And he wants to create a new class of assets that investors can invest in spectrum licenses. They would sit alongside things like real estate, commodities, futures, oil. And so you would have, as an investor, you would have an option to invest in spectrum licenses. If he is successful, he's just getting started, but he thinks he's going to be successful. We'll see.
The obvious question, though, is if you own spectrum licenses, you have a build-out requirement. And if you don't fulfill that build-out, so he would not be, it'd almost be like a net lease. He wouldn't be building anything. So how does he get around that?
Exactly.
Details.
It's like there's so many obstacles to this. What happens to the taxes?
Right.
Who's in charge of the build out? What are the terms of the lease? Is it 100 years? Is it 50 years? Would it even make sense for an operator to do this kind of a transaction and to sell its spectrum licenses? He argues his argument is that they've done the same thing with their cell towers. Previously, years ago, network operators owned all of their own cell towers, and over the years they decided to sell off that asset to other companies, use the money that they've gained through that sale for other corporate things, and then companies like Crown Castle or American Tower would actually own those cell towers, operate them, and then rent them to network operators. And so he says, why not do the same thing with spectrum licenses?
Very interesting. Well, and then I guess you have to bring in the backdrop of the 2.5 auction 108, starting next week.
Right.
Starting next week. It's like,
So is T-Mobile
just all the angles. There's so many angles to this story.
Oh, wow. Okay. And I'm going to put in another plug in. I think Mike's the only one who's really shined the light on this, because I wasn't even fully aware of it till reading your articles. And
Yeah,
I certainly wasn't focused on it. I think I had a vague recollection that they might not have owned it, but that was so many years ago. I'd sort of forgotten the details. And the fact that they're now scrambling to buy them. I'm sorry, it's not funny, but it is rather funny.
I mean, but it is very interesting. And what I love is that the actual reason that this is all going down is because in the 1960s, the FCC decided that they would take some of the spectrum that they oversaw, which was the 2.5 gigahertz band. They would just give it to schools, right? Because what they wanted to do is they wanted to have schools and educational universities and colleges and churches build TV broadcasting stations that would broadcast educational content to Americans so that we would be smarter during the Cold War. Wow. With Russia. I mean, isn't that crazy? Like that's why they own this spectrum, is because
back in the day, that probably made as much sense as some of the ideas that are circulating now.
Exactly.
And here
FCC
we sit,
was doing its part.
Also Russia being topical. Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. It's come back around.
Wow.
So here's a question that I've been asked lately, and I don't really have a good answer. And that is, with all this discussion about 5G, what exactly is what's the big ta-da moment for 5G, do you think, Mike? And in terms of use cases, right? Most of it's B2B and not necessarily something that your average consumer is going to say, oh, wow, I have one more bar on my phone. Yay. But obviously, in order to get folks excited in the policy space to to really kind of roll their sleeves up and get serious about what a pipeline looks like and what they want to do on shared and what they want to do on unlicensed, I think people feel like they need to have a reason to want to care about this beyond just the usual, let's, extend the FCC's auction authority. In your travels, your reading, your research, I mean, what's popping up as, a potentially intriguing use cases other than self-driving cars, which I think people are just really tired of hearing about, even though when they stop crashing, it'll be very cool, or telehealth. Those are the things that, most people will talk about in this context. But I think because they've been talking about it for so long, it's a big eye roll inside the Beltway.
Yeah, I agree. Why are we spending so much time on 5G when really 4G is pretty good? And actually, I am on a 4G connection right now. Like, it's pretty good. Like, you can watch Netflix, you can do all your stuff. 4G is fine for a lot of stuff. And so you're right. I think that there's no clear reason to spend all this energy on 5G yet. And if you talk to the people at AT&T and Verizon and stuff, they're aware of this situation. And right now they're arguing that, hey, 5G is going to unlock value in the enterprise. They are talking about private wireless networks for big companies like Alaska Airlines are going to build their own private wireless 5G networks. And, you're going to have a 5G network that would run inside of a factory. Building Teslas, for example, would use all these robots that would all be connected with 5G and everything would be automated, 5G, blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of, when you talk to people, that's sort of their first response is like, enterprise, and then consumer at some point down the road, they talk about remote surgery and,
right,
driverless cars and all that kind of stuff that we've already talked about. So now from my perspective, those things might pan out. We'll see. I don't know. Really what we're waiting for is an iPhone moment. I think that's what we're all kind of sitting around, right? It was like iPhone came around, blew all of our hair back, and you got to upgrade the networks. And now we're all on these, we've got, the entire internet sitting around in our pocket. That is a dramatic change from 10 years ago.
Yep.
It is. I mean, I think the smartphone, the rise of the smartphone cannot be overstated in terms of the cultural importance of that. So we're kind of waiting for, 5G comes around. Is there another iPhone moment? And I think that if it's going to be anything, it's going to be augmented reality glasses. I'm not sold on this concept, but I think that there is something there. And again, so several of us are wearing glasses. So, right. So it's a thing. So you put on your glasses and then what you do is, I don't have my phone at all. I actually am seeing you inside my glasses, right? In this scenario, I get in my car, I drive down the street, the map is in my glasses. It's not on the screen of the car. It's not in the dashboard. I put these on, now I have the map overlaid, and I'm still, everything, I can still see everything, right? It's sort of transparent. I'm walking around, I meet a friend, I see all their text messages in my glasses that they've sent. I see all their social media posts. I'm reminded about what their birthday is. It's all on my glasses, and the only way that would even possibly work is with a speedy network. That those kinds of features are not at all possible on 4G networks. The latency is way too slow. You just can't. It's not possible to get that much data. And the whole thing is that if it only works if it will follow your vision, right?
Right.
If I turn this way and I'm still seeing the stuff over here in my vision on my glasses, it has to move as I'm moving. And so my perspective is that a lot of those technologies are getting pretty close. My son has an Oculus, which is a VR, it's a virtual reality goggles. And it's weird, and it's fine you shoot zombies for a while, and then you're like, okay, that's fine. But it's like it's there, like you can kind of see, like, all right, it's sitting on my face, it's not that uncomfortable, it's getting smaller. So I'm thinking a couple of years down the road, we may actually see something along those lines. And I think it'll, again, if you remember back to the iPhone moment, iPhone dropped on 2G and 3G networks, and it crushed those networks. It just required everybody to upgrade to 4G. And so I think the same may be true with these AR glasses. It'll just crush current networks, and they'll have to upgrade to whatever the fastest, whatever it is. That's my thought.
I think that's pretty darn exciting. Do you
We'll
think
see.
these
I
guys?
don't know.
I guess maybe I should be looking around for who's making those glasses
Yeah, exactly.
as a new investment
I
strategy.
I will note that the former CEO of Qualcomm. I always looked at Qualcomm. Qualcomm is really, if anyone's investing in some of this high tech stuff, it's Qualcomm. And their former CEO is Paul Jacobs. He's the son of Irwin Jacobs, the founder of Qualcomm. So I mean, he's Paul Jacobs so he left Qualcomm, and this is what he's working on. This is exactly what he and his team is working. He's got a startup called XCOM, and they're working on this stuff. That's what they're doing. So we'll see.
Maybe our next guest.
Yes,
yeah, exactly. I would love to hear from him. Yeah.
Mike, you were great. That was awesome. If I could summarize my 3 takeaways, I would put it like this. Correct me if I'm wrong, keep me honest. Dish, watch for this underdog. Second, T-Mobile no longer can take candy from babies. And third, 5G is the next iPhone moment. We're waiting for an iPhone moment from 5G. The last time the first iPhone dropped, both when Carolyn and I were pregnant with 2007 babies. So I'm not going back there, but maybe we'll wait for a good moment. So that's
Mike,
great.
thank you very, very much for joining us. You were great. The connection was perfect, so it all worked. I know you were a little bit nervous it wasn't going to come through, but
about that. Yeah.
Really appreciate it. Thank you all very much. Go ahead.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Great discussion.
Not at all. I was just looking at my calendar. I think we are all going to take a break for the month of August.
Yes.
And we will reconvene in September. I don't know if we have a date yet for the week of the 19th or 26th, but I think it's kind of. Do we have a date, Jen? I can't remember.
It's the third Wednesday of the month. So would that be
the 14th?
Yes.
The 14th. All right, September 14th, folks. Look for us, save the date, and thank you for joining us. Jen, it was great to see you.
You too, Carolyn, and everyone follow Mike Dano.
Yes. Mike, thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Have a good one. Have a great week.
August.
Bye-bye.